The first wave of free agency came and went before you know it. Who's left on the market that should be of interest to the Miami Dolphins based on the moves they've already made?
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, author of Touchdown Miami on Substack, and the NFL draft lead for the 33rd team. I want to give a special welcome and shout out to our everydayers because it is your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it. Here on the Locked On Network, today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app. Create an account and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. What time is it? It's game time. It's time for us to take a little stroll through the available free agency pool. And a lot of the names that are left over, many are players that are on the wrong side of 30 or have an injury that they're coming off of last season that's maybe negatively impacted their markets, or maybe they're really role-specific players at devalued positions. You can kind of go down the list, and there's any number of reasons why some of the names that we're going to talk about here on the show are available as of March 19th. Now, you may have players that become available via trade. You obviously have the NFL draft that awaits you as a big investment opportunity for this Miami Dolphins team. But there's roles to be filled and there's opportunities on this roster for sure. We looked at that yesterday and said, where are we better, where are we worse, and where do we just not have anybody, right? So the question is, are the Dolphins finished with their major roster moves? And I'm inclined to say like the big splash, the offseason splash might not come in the way that a Teron Armstead signing in free agency has come, or Ndamukong Suh free agency splash sign like that. That's probably a pipe dream at this point. A trade is probably far-fetched because you'd be talking about, giving up a pick in theory for a player. I think any blockbuster deals for the Dolphins in trades this offseason from this point on is going to be a player going out, and he wears number 10. That would be if something were to happen. That's kind of where I'd be inclined to think it would happen. So a lot of Dolphins fans have questions about the cornerback 2 spot, the defensive tackle spot, the primary safety spot. And I recently listened to an interview that Ravens general manager Eric DeCosta did. And he talked about the nature of free agency and how it's an illogical market. We saw that. And that was not Eric DeCosta this year saying that. It was last year him saying that. And you saw the illogical nature of the market for the dollars, for what your valuation is for a player versus what the demand dictates that that player actually receives. I think not being involved in that is admirable. I think it's a good business, long-term scope for the team. But it does leave you with a lot of questions. And the other thing that he said that I think is what I'm applying to where the Dolphins are at right now is don't make a move prematurely. And when I consider the Dolphins, let's just consider it defensive tackle. You have a number of veteran / free agent nose tackles that are available on the market. You have, Benito Jones was on the roster last year and is available. You have John Jenkins who's out there. You have Jonathan Hankins who's out there. You have Raekwon Davis who's out there. Those guys are all veteran nose tackle types. And if that market has now become stale, right? If you're going to sit on it and you're going to say there's a lot of moves and shoes that have to drop in the next 6 weeks before the NFL draft for us to be out of options for a nose tackle. I think that's a very reasonable stance to take, to say, hey, we don't have to make this move right now in case the defensive tackle that we really like at 13 is our best player on the board. And that's Kenneth Grant. Or if it's Alfred Collins from Texas at 48. But what happens if you sign John Jenkins to a 1-year, $4 million contract? You're probably not going to now take that pick and invest it into a second nose tackle, right? So I think it's less about the Dolphins being done, and it's more, as I'm looking at who's available, the likelihood of the markets that are available running dry for some of the roles that exist. And then what's available in the draft, I think they don't have to make a move right now. Now, would I feel better if I woke up let's be honest, kids don't sleep. If I woke up 17 hours from now on Thursday, March 20th, and you had a nose tackle on the roster, and you had somebody to play next to Zach Sealer on the roster, and you had somebody who you felt could be the other starting safety on the roster that you felt good about, and you had a CB2 on, would I feel better if all those things were done? Yes. And the big point of emphasis and the talking point has been put yourself in a position where you don't have to draft for need in the draft. That's where you want to be. That's where you should be. You have enough resources to make that happen. But I guess as I'm looking at the market and some notable names at safety that still exist that I like, some veteran cornerbacks that probably are going to be short-term options at varying price points. Defensive tackles we've alluded to, some offensive linemen that still exist out there. There's enough out there that the general assumption of you have to have the player signed before the draft to then therefore have yourself in a position to draft for need. I don't think that's necessarily the case with the way the cards are laid on the table right now. I think you cannot avoid drafting for need unless these markets, these secondary free agent markets, become exhausted over the course of the next 6 weeks. In which case, if you see movement, if you have a bunch of guys that are similar age range and similar cost range and similar skill sets, and you say, hey, we're not going to commit to one of these until A, the list of available free agents gets significantly shorter, or B, after the draft, so that we have more flexibility with how we draft for value while simultaneously filling needs on the roster. I don't think we're done. Now, are we splurging? No, we're not emptying the chamber like a lot of people thought that maybe the Dolphins would, because it's a high-pressure season. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. But I don't think they're done. I think this is more so supply and demand. Don't make the decision before you have to, right? And that, again, I'm not going to sit here and make excuses if this goes nuclear and blows up in your face and everybody goes on a run and now you're left without a dance partner to play nose tackle, and then you got to draft one and you force the pick. That's going to be bad. That's bad process. But I can reconcile some of the needs that this Dolphins team still has at some spots and say, maybe we need to hurry up and wait and see how does this market dry up all the way, because I don't think some of the areas they need are completely dry. Who's left? We're going to get into that next here on this episode of Locked On Dolphins, so make sure you guys stick with us. Imagine watching your favorite team live, feeling the energy of the crowd, and witnessing unforgettable moments in person. There's nothing like seeing big games there at the arena or at the stadium. That's what sports are all about, but not just sports, concerts, comedy, theater, more. You name it. Getting tickets shouldn't be a stressful experience and take away from the experience of seeing your favorite venues. It's where Game Time comes in, making it easier than ever to grab last-minute seats at unbeatable prices. With Game Time picks, they curate and make it easier to find the best values for tickets to sports, concerts, comedy, theater, more, you name it. And they have super deals, the lowest price guarantee. If you find lower tickets in the same row and section for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. And you can have peace of mind when you purchase your tickets. You can see the view from the seat before you purchase. There's no surprise fees with all-in pricing. And you can book with total confidence to get down to the arena or the stadium to see all of your favorite live entertainment. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. That's LOCKEDON NFL. for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. I don't think the Dolphins are shopping for lowest prices, but they're shopping for surplus value. And I think here's the good news. When you consider who's available at quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end through the skill players right now, and you cross-reference what the Dolphins have and had with young players and players that are under contract, and then adding Pharaoh Brown at tight end to go with Julian Hill and with Jonnu Smith, and adding Nick Westbrook-Akine to go with Jalen Waddle, number 10, Malik Washington. If number 10 is no longer here come the start of the season, that changes the dynamic there, but that's probably a draft solution for you anyway. And then running back, you have Jalen Wright and as a fourth round pick that cost you a third round pick this year to get him in the boat. And he looked really good with the opportunities that he had. And then you have Devon Achane with Alexander Madison as a new ad. These positions, I think, are fairly dry. If I was going to ask myself, hey, QB3 that you like, potential competition for running back 3 or maybe running back 4 if you don't want to go that way in the draft, is there a wide receiver you like to kind of be another viable threat or another tight end, whether it's an inline player? It's like, do I want to sit here and throw out the name Mo Alley Cox? Not really. He's on the wrong side of 30. The Colts have tried to replace him for years, right? I think maybe like a lottery ticket on a Cam Akers would be interesting for me. Cam Akers, obviously out of Florida State, had a productive very early of career, then it had an injury, and then it's kind of lost some explosiveness coming out of the injury. How do you foil that with Alexander Madison? I don't have a good answer there. I don't see a lot of appeal with the skill group. But in the offensive line, there's a number of names that are still available that I should say that they at least have my interest. You have names that are familiar, like Daniel Brunskill, formerly played in San Francisco when Mike McDaniel was there. Joe Noteboom, who we did in the offseason blueprint, can kind of fill theoretically the same type of role as what Larry Borum might be filling as a tackle flex player who can also play guard. You want to free Larry Borum to play guard, and I have no indication that's their intentions. But if you did and you wanted more peace of mind, Joe Noteboom's out there. George Fant was cut from his contract. He's a street free agent. Dylan Raduns from Tennessee, guard tackle flexibility, played on the right side. Will Hernandez is a name that had been attached to the Dolphins in a lot of the early build to free agency throughout the winter time. And he kind of meshes with when you consider James Daniels and Larry Borum are bigger, 325-plus pound offensive linemen. Will Hernandez is built that same way as well. He's still out there. Tevin Jenkins just had a visit, but I believe didn't sign. He had a visit with Seattle yesterday, but left without closing a deal. It's another name that's out there. So for a lot of Dolphins fans who see, okay, you brought in Larry Borum, tackle tape's not good. You brought in James Daniels coming off an Achilles tear. You brought back Liam Eichenberg. Sorry it's like Beetlejuice. You don't want to say his name too many times. I get it. I get everybody all upset. But you brought back Liam on a 1-year deal. You're feeling antsy, right? But I look at, you could tell me they'd sign any one of those names. And I'd throw Jedrick Wills in there as well. Formerly first-round pick in Cleveland, didn't work out. I think he played right tackle at Alabama. There's some versatility appeal there, but you got George Fant, Joe Noteboom, Jedrick Wills, Dylan Raduns, Will Hernandez, Daniel Brunskill, Tevin Jenkins. That's not a small list, right? All things considered, if I got Cam Akers at running back and I got Mo Alley Cox at tight end, and I'm like, I'm kind of pushing it with those guys to begin with. It's not a small list to have that many names that are, I think, at least of modest interest. So that goes back to, does Jenkins sign in Seattle as soon as I finish hitting record here? And then I'm factually wrong on the show and I'll get a couple YouTube comments telling me, hey, Kyle, just so you know, Tevin signed in Seattle. Does Daniel Brunskill sign tomorrow? Does Will Hernandez sign on Friday? And then Dylan Raduns and Joe Noteboom sign on Saturday? And then you're down to Joe Fant or George Fant and Dylan Raduns or Jedrick Wills is like, and all of a sudden this list is down to a couple players. Yeah, I think that changes your urgency if you are intending on adding another player to the pile. But as things currently stand, this is a long enough list of names where I think there's enough compelling names that I'm saying, okay, I'm just kind of going to wait it out. I think that's what the Dolphins are doing. Again, I'd wake up feeling better tomorrow if you just took care of it all and you signed them all. There is a minor subplot here. We're going to touch on this with a full acknowledgement that this was a game the Dolphins played last year, and it blew up in their face. We're going to talk about that in addition to the defensive side of the ball coming up next here on Locked On Dolphins, so stick with us. I'm going to say the phrase and try not to recoil when I do. Compensatory picks. The Dolphins played this game last year. They got 3 comp picks out of it. They got a comp pick in the 7th round for Deshaun Elliott. They got a comp pick in the 4th round for Christian Wilkins because he didn't play 25% of the snaps for the Raiders, so he got downgraded from a 3 to a 4. And you got a 3rd round pick for Robert Hunt, who ended up making the Pro Bowl this year in Carolina. Calais Campbell is unsigned and would be a qualifying free agent for compensatory picks. I'm not saying this is what they're doing, but they said last year out loud that they played this game and it cost them a backup quarterback that ended up costing them dearly in the season. Right now, you can go to overthecap.com and they correctly projected 26 out of the 32 down to the ranking in the order of compensatory picks that were awarded from the league to teams for net gains and losses in free agency. We're not going to do the what is a comp pick, how does it work, and we're not doing all that. Just know this. There's a certain dollar threshold that contracts have to equal for qualifying free agents to qualify as a net gain or loss that impacts the compensatory pick formula. Right now, the Dolphins have 2 losses in free agency that qualify for compensatory picks as losses. Those players are Javon Holland, who qualifies for a 4th round pick, but they're not getting credited that because they've added other players as well. And Robert Jones qualifies for a 7th. So the losses that they lost 2. Amongst the contracts the Dolphins have handed out in free agency for players coming into the team, they also have 2 players that are above the dollar threshold to qualify for compensatory picks. It's Zach Wilson and James Daniels. Everybody else, Larry Borum, Melifonwu, Westbrook Akine, Ashton Davis, KJ Britt, Alexander Madison, Artie Burns. Well, the Artie Burns terms aren't known, but that's not one that's expected to be a large dollar amount, right? None of those free agent additions qualify for a qualifying free agent that you lost or gained in free agency, which means right now you have 2 gains and 2 losses. If Calais Campbell leaves and he signs for more than like $5 million, you could suddenly be -1 in qualifying players, and you'd be in position to fetch a 4th round compensatory pick for Javon Holland. I'm just saying the numbers are on Over the Cap. They lay it out. They were historically extremely accurate with this kind of thing. And right now, your net is 0. 2 gains, 2 losses. If Calais chooses to sign in Baltimore, which is what it seems to be suggested is the alternative to playing in Miami, And if the dollar amount surpasses, I think the cutoff right now for a 7 is around $4 million. If that's what Calais Campbell signs for and goes in a different direction, the Dolphins would be leveraged to get a 4th-round compensatory pick for Javon Holland unless they signed another qualifying free agent. Reminder, the Dolphins played this game last year, and players that are cut from their previous contracts do not qualify because their contracts did not expire. They were terminated. So they're street free agents as compared to qualifying free agents for comp picks. I say all that to say, you look at some of the names that are available for specific roles that are street free agents on the defensive side of the ball. And maybe the Dolphins are waiting. Maybe if Calais Campbell comes back and say, okay, that was our last chance to get up into being at a deficiency for players that went out versus that went in for qualifying players. If he's back, we've already neutralized the 2 that we lost. And Calais Campbell re-signs in Miami. Maybe they'd go out and they at the drop of a hat, they'd sign a guard and a nose tackle and a 3rd corner the moment that happened, because they know they're not risking now. If Calais made a decision to come back to Miami, they're not risking an early day 3 draft pick as compared to if they wait until the Monday after the draft. That's the closing of the compensatory pick window in the first place. So you get about 7 weeks until you could sign anybody, and it does not impact this formula. But Calais has to make his decision within that window as well, and he would have to choose to go to Baltimore for you to be in a position to collect draft pick, according to overthecap.com. So I'm just throwing it out there. You do with it what you will. I don't care. Get mad if you want. Just not at me. Don't shoot the messenger. At defensive tackle, Calais Campbell is still out there. Benito Jones is still out there. But so is Raekwon Davis. So is Austin Johnson. So is John Kaminsky. So is John Jenkins. So is Jonathan Hankins. That, like the offensive line group, has enough names on it with enough appeal for, they're not universal players, but they're role-playing type players that can fit within the ecosystem next to Zach Sealer and potentially a high draft pick if they find one. I think you could feel decent about that group. Now, you'd be leaning on the strength of the edges and leaning on Zach Sealer. That's nothing new. They did that. They've done that. The difference is we haven't drafted defensive tackles in Miami with any significant investment, because you had a couple of snap hogs in Christian Wilkins and Zach Sealer that ended up each one of them playing like 80% of the snaps or more. We're not living in that world anymore. On the edge, 2 street free agents that are available. So again, you could sign them and they would not impact your waiting game with Calais Campbell that maybe is going on. I'm not saying that is what's going on, but they played the game last year and they're in a position to capitalize on it if Calais leaves. DeMarcus Walker and Zadarius Smith. Zadarius Smith probably going to be out of your price point. A good football player still. But they allegedly were kicking the tires on a couple of edge guys, maybe looking for a 4th guy. We know they were in on Joey Bosa. If you're going to sniff on Joey Bosa and you're serious about it, like, you could certainly sniff around on Zadarius Smith, and I would not be mad about it one bit. I would rather have Zadarius Smith and Joey Bosa straight up. At linebacker, you're looking for a 4th guy, predominantly a special teams type of player. There's 2 guys that were cut that I think are interesting to me, and then another who's a former Dolphin who has gone on to have himself a very fruitful NFL career. Jalen Reeves-Maybin from Detroit and Sion Takitaki from New England were both cut from their previous contract. So it's not a part of the potential hypothetical waiting game that this team might or might not be playing right now. Reeves-Maybin has made a career on special teams. I think he would be an awesome 4th linebacker, Jalen Reeves-Maybin. I think he's a better teams player than Duke Riley. I he's a little bit stout. He's not a big linebacker by any means. But I do think he's a little bit more stout than Duke. Neville Hewitt's the other name here as a free agent who, formerly of Miami, early in his career, had a number of different stops and just keeps on ticking. If that's your fourth linebacker, I think you could do a lot worse as a guy who's predominantly going to play special teams. They may want a more rangy player, though, given that KJ Britt is a little bit more of a phone booth type player at the linebacker 3 spot. So that's why I really like the idea of Jalen Reese-Maven. At corner, pretty much anybody you're looking at in this bucket is on the wrong side of 30. And that's a cliff age for corners. But Akella Witherspoon is out there, continues to be a productive NFL player, played in San Francisco, played with the Rams this past year. So he has experience with some coaches off of this coaching tree that the Dolphins have implemented in Miami. The Titans cut Chidobe Awuzie. I don't know how good of a fit he is. He might be expensive. He got a pretty impressive deal from the Titans last year in free agency. He was a one and done there on a 3-year contract. So, and he was coming off of a major injury in 2023. So there's probably going to be an intersection of cost, age, risk, counterproductivity of bringing another older veteran that's a potential blockade when you just brought in Artie Burns to that room. But it's a name that I think is at least worth mentioning. And then it's safety. This is the other spot where you kind of get the pins and needles. You're waiting, right? Like, okay, I like Melifonwu. Ashton Davis is a third guy. You got some competition with Campbell and McMorris. How high can McMorris go up on this list? Kind of feel like you're missing that guy at the top. I got 4 names. and the draft still to go. Maybe don't make that commitment and decision here until you see how the board falls. And then you can take this grocery list and go shopping after the draft. RayShawn Jenkins was cut from his contract, played in Seattle, which conveniently enough, who's the head coach in Seattle? Oh, Mike McDonald. And who did Anthony Weaver work underneath before coming to Miami? Oh, right, Mike McDonald in Baltimore. Jordan Fuller, Julian Blackman, those two guys are 27 years old. They're still relatively young players. And then Jordan Whitehead from Tampa Bay, who I really like Jordan Whitehead's game. Now, he had a car accident at the end of the year last year and had some kind of neck fracture, but is expected to make a full recovery well ahead of the start of the season. He might not get a market until the medicals become more clear on him, but that's another name. He'd be a ferocious piece in the secondary. A really good hitter. So if your anxiety lies with a potential another offensive guard, with the defensive tackle position, and with a safety at the top to tie things together, I got at least 4 names in every single one of those groups. And an offensive line and defensive tackle, I got more than 4. I got 6, 7 names, plus the draft. So this is where I'm looking at all the variables in play, and I'm trying to ask myself, why is there not more movement? And this is the answer I can come to. The first wave is done. The run has not started on the second group yet. Everybody's kind of posturing and waiting and trying to get the best possible value for their client, and the teams are trying to get the best possible price while simultaneously weighing out. Don't over-invest in certain spots when you're working in a finite resource league before the draft when you get a lot more clarity. I think this team can still draft for best player available and avoid drafting for need as long as the grocery list in free agency looks similar by the time the draft comes. So you should be hoping for no free agency movement at this point, unless it's a player that comes to Miami at a price point that's friendly for the Dolphins. Or maybe Calais Campbell signs back in Miami and they know a 4th-round pick is off the table and they are free to up some of their offers and close some deals. That's going to do it for us here today on Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day. Appreciate you guys as always for checking out the show. Make it a great rest of your day. I'll be back to talk more Dolphins football with you all again soon. Go Fins.